Hello friends and foes of Middle-earth and welcome back. Let's break down episode 3 of the Rings of Power. My disappointment grows ever bigger. If you thought the 2 previous episodes were bad, you're gonna be mind blown after this episode. One thing is the whole lore being off, but the writing for this show is so bad I can barely handle it. So let's jump right into it. So we start off by seeing Arondir captured by the Orcs. And look how terrifying they look. Oh, sorry, wrong image. Here they are. Ooh, skull helmets. So evil. Anyway, the Orcs make him a slave along with some other humans and his elf friends. Yeah, these guys. Don't remember them? They appeared for like 10 seconds. Yeah, if you're wondering what their name was, you need to pause and look in the corner. Yeah, apparently that's how you're meant to make a masterpiece these days. Pause and look at the info dump in the corner, just to get an idea what's going on. Then we see Galadriel and Halbrand on board Elendil's ship. And oh no, he took her dagger. We then get to Númenor. Looks like the next Assassin's Creed game. By the way, they decided to mix together Armenelor's the capital with Romena. Yeah, that was the easy way. But I guess that's pretty good. One location less to keep track of. There's way too many already. Also, what's up with all the waterfalls? Every damn location has one. Even Khazad-dûm has one. Galadriel gives us a huge info dump of information. It's a nice fan service, but probably confusing for non-Tolkien fans. Still, a minor thumbs up from here. The whole looks fine, obviously very inspired by Minas Tirith. Queen-regent Míriel. Obviously not lore accurate. She never ruled as queen, and Chancellor Pharazôn. Oh, come on. I wonder if he will wed Míriel by force in a later season. Probably not. Oh, yeah, and Galadriel is apparently commander of the northern armies of High King Gil-galad. Is there also a southern army? Am I missing something? It's pretty obvious that this scene is a rip-off from Game of Thrones. But I guess that's what they wanted. Anyway, Galadriel insists she must go to Middle-earth and demand a ship. She basically threatens to murder everyone, denying her to sail away. Yeah, we're supposed to like this character, by the way, if you forgot that. Halbrand saves the day by suggesting that the Queen and her advisors are given 3 days to think about Galadriel's request. And of course they think that's a great idea. Why? Nobody knows. Pharazôn then demands his palace guards to watch Galadriel, and then right in front of hundreds of people, Halbrand steals back Galadriel's dagger from Elendil. Nobody notices, of course. Just like nobody notices when he gives her back the dagger. I mean, they stand right next to them and they just like, oh yeah, let her have the weapon back. That seems reasonable. Oh yeah, and it seems like there's actually going to be a romance between Halbrand and Galadriel, which of course is very absurd, as she was already married to Celeborn. But then again, she never went to Númenor either. So this show is just pure fanfiction, and an extremely bad one, if I must say. Apparently Míriel have no clue who Elendil is. It's not like his father Arondir was in the council of her father or anything. And apparently Elendil is also stripped of all his proper titles and reduced to a sea guardsman. Why? No clue. We then cut to Isildur and his friends on a ship. And for once we actually hear the name of some of the side characters. I still got no clue who is who and why I should care. Some woman whispers to Isildur. I guess we will get back to that later on in another episode. They go ashore and sort of pray to the sea while saying, the sea is always right. God, that line is so stupid. I get that they are trying to establish the Númenorians as a seafaring people. That's great, but I don't think it's done in a good way. Oh yeah, and this guy's called Imrahil. They're going to steal names whenever they can. Oh yeah, and Isildur's made-up sister shows up. We cut back to the hall where Míriel talks about the faithful and what they believe. Why would she have to tell that to Elendil, whose father is the leader of the faithful? I don't know. She probably doesn't know that Elendil is part of it. It's all nonsense and made-up lore, of course. She then goes on and asks what his name means. They try to be lore accurate again, but fail once more. This was a nice attempt though. We once more hear that the sea is always right. I think the armor for the guards is better than most of what we have seen so far, but I do think there's too much gold in this show. Oh yeah, and if you're having a hard time liking Galadriel, Míriel is equally horrible as a likable character. That's quite the achievement. And we're back with Arondir and the other slaves. By the way, what are these slaves even meant to be doing? Digging trenches? Why? It does seem to allude to Tolkien's experiences during World War I, so yeah, I guess that's sort of interesting. Not too much though. Oh, and yes, Chancellor is in this series too. He played a ton of roles in The Lord of the Rings and Nori in The Hobbit. And we get this piece of dialogue. Arondir asks why Sauron would use an elvish name, like Adar, meaning father. And I just want to point out that Sauron is also an elvish name. It's Quenya and means the abhorred. The elves refuse to cut down the tree, and one of them gets killed in slow motion. Don't worry though, we only heard his name once, so he's not important. Okay, I have to point this out. That's a lot of cloth. I guess we finally know what female orcs are doing. Galadriel goes full Assassin's Creed to escape the guards. How did she get up there? Stop asking questions. You're not meant to be thinking while watching. Galadriel have decided to steal a ship, but Elendil thinks it's a pretty bad idea. She still wants to steal the ship though, but then Elendil says he could just call the guards. And then the most insane thing happens. She threatens Elendil to bloody murder him. How are we supposed to like this character? There's absolutely nothing good about her. At this point, I'd rather join Sauron just to avoid being on the same side as Galadriel. She might murder you if you disagree with her. Why is she holding the dagger like that, by the way? Is that meant to look cool? Give me a break. Oh, and Galadriel's arrogance just leveled up. She clearly hates mortals. No wonder they hate elves in return, if they are all like this. But Elendil's reply is equally bad. Apparently, Isildur runs blind. Yeah, the guy that saves the fruit from Nimloth later on, but I bet that won't happen in the show. Or maybe he was talking about an Arian, but I doubt that. At least it seems like Elendil is part of the faithful, but that's about the only law-accurate thing in this episode so far. And then they ride for the Hall of Law, wherever that's supposed to be. And hold your pipe and hat, ladies and gentlemen. More slow motion. Like if the story wasn't slow enough already. I must say though, it's a wonderful shampoo ad. And something incredible happens. We see Galadriel smile for the first time. And Halbrand just really wants to forge something. I mean, he just managed not to get imprisoned. And 5 minutes later, he wants a job in the same city. What is happening? Now it just seems even more likely that he is indeed Sauron. More dumb stuff happens next. He is not allowed to forge steel in Númenor until he earned a guild crest. How does he earn it then, if he is not even allowed to practice? Is he meant to go to a colony and then get back? It makes no sense. Halbrand sits some random place and eats some food. How did he afford that? Don't ask questions. You're still not meant to think. Then comes some dialogue with very loaded political messages. This show is just so great. Halbrand has suddenly become the richest man on Númenor because he suddenly decides to buy ale to everyone nearby. Yeah, let's not forget he just came from a scene where he couldn't get a job, and before that he was in the middle of the ocean. How are we supposed to take this seriously? Did he steal the money? Then show us at least. Anyway, everybody is suddenly very happy. Halbrand then steals the crest from this guy, then they follow him and want to confront him about stealing. Obviously they want to give him a lesson, but then he goes full crazy and bloody murder them all. I guess Galadriel and him got something in common after all. Maybe they are actually a good match. The guard shows up and he is thrown into the dungeons. And if you thought the episode was bad so far, it's about to get worse. We're at the Hall of Law, and Galadriel and Elendil are looking at the sigil for Sauron. Yeah, the one we saw in the first episode. This is a nice sigil, by the way. A Arondir. Something law accurate for once. Apparently the Hall of Law was built by Elros, and we see him on this painting. Wait, what? You can't see that these two are twins? Well, Elros isn't supposed to have a beard. Maybe that's why. Well, at least I think it was nice. They mentioned him, and it seems like a part of Númenor's history will integrate it. Oh, and apparently Tar Palantir lives in exile in a tower, because he liked the elves. At least that's closer to the law than most of the stuff we got. But no, he was never in exile. Maybe they will explore this even more in the next episodes. I hope so. This guy shows up with a note about Sauron's sigil, and now comes the dumbest part so far. The sigil is no sigil at all. Nope, it's a map of Mordor, a backup plan if Morgoth fell. I had heard that theory some time ago, but I thought it was an incredibly stupid one that couldn't be real. It appears I underestimated the stupidity of the writers of this show. Yes, it's a map, a very inaccurate one, that barely resembles Mordor. This map they show is not even close to be accurate, but they had to change it on purpose so it looks more like the terrible sigil. I mean, they even got the map right earlier on. That sigil doesn't look like the real Mordor. I mean, what about these mountains? Or these ones? And no, Mindoluin in Gondor are not on the same line as Mount Doom. But the worst part is that Galadriel knows the world so well that she instantly knows where it is. So that means for the past centuries, where she's been hunting for Sauron, it never occurred to her to turn the sigil. Oh my goodness. God, it's really hard to take this show seriously when the writing is so bad. I mean, fair enough, it can follow the law entirely, but write a good script instead. This is beyond dreadful. Oh no, and we get back to the Harfoots. And in this episode we learned that they are all psychopaths, so hang on. They're doing some sort of dance ritual while singing. Oh, and if you didn't catch this in the previous episodes, Elenor is still super badass. I bet they will say it again in the next episode, in case we forget. And then she blackmails her friend to get help. What a wonderful character. It's not hard at all to like her, is it? I mean, she's just so perfect. She then looks in Zadok's book to find some clue, and I have to add something I left out in the first review. Hobbits are not meant to have books. The reason we know so little about their early history is because they didn't write down anything. A bit like we know very little about the Vikings. Most of what we know comes from outside sources or is written down much later. The early history about the Hobbits was actually written down by Arnorian scholars, something I talk about in my series about the fall of Arnor. Feel free to check it out. Zadok then holds a speech to the Harfoots. I guess that's meant to be an Easter egg, referencing to Bilbo's speech at his birthday. They then proceed to list all the Harfoots that have died during the previous migrations. And they all laugh at some guy who died by bees. Apparently he was an idiot. These hobbits are pretty psychotic compared to the ones we remember from the other films. By these standards, Gollum must have been considered a nice guy, despite murdering his kinsman. These costumes, by the way. Oh yeah, and if you missed it, Hoppy's entire family died. The stranger then shows up. He has no clue how fire works, and is also extremely clumsy, and destroys part of the camp by accident. He then asks for Nori, and her entire family is punished by being in the back of the caravan, which is basically a death sentence. Apparently Isildur doesn't want to be a sailor after all, which is an issue apparently for Elendil. His sister Eärien gets accepted into the Builders Guild and wants to become an architect. I'm sure she will be the one who designs Minas Tirith in one of the later seasons. I've already said this once before, but now I'm even more certain. Anyway, Galadriel is also back in Armenelos. She somehow knows Halbrand is locked away in the dungeons, and for some reason she's also allowed to visit the dungeons, and there's not a single guard keeping an eye on her. Don't ask why or how. Apparently Halbrand is some cheap discount Aragorn, or rather Aragorn from the films. A reluctant king of the Southlands, aka Mordor. Galadriel then convinces him that it was some higher power that brought them together. Yeah, it was. It was bad writing. That's why you met on a raft in the middle of the ocean, and we still don't know why Halbrand was even there. Oh, nice sigil by the way. A radish with wings. I bet it's not that bad to be called Onion Knight after all. I got no clue why Galadriel thinks she has to redeem her bloodline. Lore-wise, that makes me want to punch a hole in the wall. But let's move on before I actually do it. Míriel then goes to visit her father, Tar Palantir, who we will likely first see in the next episode. I wonder what he will look like, and not in a good way. It sounds like there was some sort of prophecy or something about an elf coming to Númenor, but maybe we'll hear more in a later episode. And at the end of the episode we are back with Arondir and the other slaves. Oh, and apparently the orcs are now vampire orcs, but the sun only burns their faces, not the exposed arms. Why? Stop asking. Nothing makes sense. Arondir's hero moment, in slow motion of course. I'm out of words. The orcs then decide to release a warg. Oh, wrong image again. Here it is. Look how menacing it is. At least it's a total death machine that kills off a bunch of nobodies. Arondir then has another slow-mo hero moment and then traps the warg behind the roots of the giant tree. Arondir goes full Mary Poppins and kills an orc with a stick. Yeah, that just happened. His friend, whose name we have not heard, escapes. The warg chases after him, but Arondir throws a spear and no-scopes it. Mr. Nobody then flees across the field, but is shot by orc archers. Arondir is pulled back. Yes, more slow motion. Instead of just killing him, the orcs thinks it's a good idea. He meets Adar. How convenient for the plot. Is it Sauron? Most likely not. We don't get to see him clearly, but that is how the episode ends. Let's hand out some points once more. Story. 1 out of 10. This time there were so many things wrong. That made zero sense. I was just plain dumb. At least story-wise. I can't believe this episode lasted 1 hour and 10 minutes, and barely anything happened. This entire show feels very much like too many had a say on the script, so it points in 1,000 directions and all the scenes are barely connected. There's barely anything but setups. Will it be interesting later on? I have some serious doubts. Lore. 1 out of 10. The lore was just as horrible as in the last episode. They tried a few times, but got it all wrong again. A few lore accurate things was that Elendil was a member of the Faithful, the Tree of Nimloth is in Númenor, and Palantir did indeed lift the ban on the elves, but he never lived in a tower in exile. So they get a few things right, but at the same time they also make so many mistakes. All in all, Númenor in this show is extremely different to what we can read in the books. It looks like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and if I had to make a comparison, I'd say Assassin's Creed Odyssey is as historical accurate as this show is lore accurate, which means barely at all. Cinematography. 3 out of 10. Again, nothing major this time. I don't think there was anything especially good, but God, stop with all the slow motion. This is not 300. There was way too much slow motion in this episode. That's why it gets such a low score. Just stop it. Visuals. 6 out of 10. I think some of the sets for Númenor look good. Of course the CGI was super gamey once again, as I've already expressed. I think there was a few good ones here and there, but overall, it can be as pretty as it wants, but it lacks soul. Dialogue. 3 out of 10. We are back with a ton of bad dialogue. They try really hard to sound intelligent, and I guess sound like Tolkien, but it fails at every attempt. I was considering to give an even lower score, as the dialogue just makes us hate the characters even more, but I will be merciful this one time. Acting. 3 out of 10. I think Lloyd Owen did a decent job as Elendil. I think he's one of the few characters I like, just a tiny bit, but I guess he got some cheap points, because I know what Elendil did lore-wise. I'm still hoping to see that later on. I also think Emma Horvath as Eärien was fine, and Maxim Baldry as Isildur was also alright. There weren't too many scenes with them, but I think their acting was alright, and it's what dragged up the score. I also think Jeb Brophy as the orc was fine, and this orc as well, but then there's the bad stuff. I find it really hard to like Míriel. She's just so unlikable. Maybe it will change, but so far I despise her as much as I despise Galadriel. And speaking of Galadriel, I feel I gave Morfydd Clark a fair shot as Galadriel, but her acting is basically just stone-facing and getting angry. And then when we finally get something else, it's this. I just find that even more terrifying. Charlie Wickes as Halbrand fell off to me for some reason. I feel he was trying to act like some other actors, but I couldn't put my finger on it. All in all, a lot of bad performances, but Elendil dragged up the score to a 3. Costumes, 5 out of 10. I think we saw some better costumes in this episode. The armors for the Númenorian guards were some of the best I've seen so far. I didn't really like the costumes for the orcs, but the orcs themselves looked really good and better than most of the ones we saw in the Hobbit trilogy. So it's really just the orcs that makes it earn a 5. I didn't like Elendil's armor, and there's too much gold in this series already. truly hate the half-orcs and how little they resemble hobbits. I might even do a full video on that, as the resemblance is barely there. Just being short doesn't make you a hobbit. Music and sounds. 6 out of 10. We end with a 6 again. I think some of the music early on in the episode was alright. I do feel overall that it just sort of become background noise, so I must admit I don't always pay attention to it. There's still something missing for me to give it a higher score, but I think the quality is somewhat decent and consistent. And what's my final score for this episode then? Well, first episode ended with a 3.5, and then a 3 in the last episode. I feel there were so many mistakes story-wise in this episode, as I've tried to highlight in this review. The map thing of Mordor was a low point for me. I have to end with a 2 out of 10, and I actually consider that very generous. I liked that they tried to integrate Elros into the story, but overall there wasn't much I liked in this episode. It did feel slightly less boring than the other two, but at the same time the bad writing just made me cringe even more. It was hard and painful to get through, and I'm almost at a point where I don't want to do any more of these reviews. I will do it though, for your entertainment, and to talk about some of the lore. I also think these reviews will stand in sharp contrast to my own take on how I would write the show. As I've mentioned before, I plan to make a mini-series with 8 episodes about how I would write Season 1 for the Rings of Power. Or perhaps how the Rings of Power should have been. Anyway, it's always a joy to read all your wonderful comments, so leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of this episode. Was I too hard on it? And what score would you give it? Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and if you want to know about the early history of the hobbits and hear how Arnor fell, then this mini-series might interest you. I hope to finish the third and last part after the Rings of Power. As always, thank you all so much for watching and farewell till next time.